You're listening to Live from the Heartland, WLUW 88.7, Chicago Sound Alliance. My name is Katy Hogan. I'm today's host for our weekly show, which you are welcome to tune in every week, 9 to 10. We cover a lot of interesting material, and as you can tell from this show, it'll have a bit of everything: the environment, political activity, and music and arts. And that's kind of the way we spin it here. So you are more than welcome to join our listening audience every week, and also give us some feedback anytime you feel. Right now, I want to say good morning and welcome to Aaron Hughes. Aaron, thanks for being
Katy.
here.
How are you doing this morning?
We have been trying for a while to get you on this show, and I'm glad that we finally succeeded.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate all the attempts, and I'm really glad that I'm finally here. So
you're
thanks.
a busy man. I mean, that's part of why we weren't able to track you down earlier. You're a busy man, and you are. I don't know if you're a founding member or not of Iraq Veterans Against the War.
No, I'm not a founding member. I joined the organization in 2006. It was started in 2004.
2004, which means 2 years after the war started.
Well, actually, the war started in 2003.
1 year.
It was at the Veterans for Peace conference in July that it kicked off.
So. Well, one of the things I was just saying to you before we got on the air, you know, when I was in my 20s, it was the Vietnam War, and there was the draft. And so it was a lot more immediate in people's lives, and it was also more spread out throughout the population. The folks who were going to war came from every area, every income bracket, except for those who maybe, you know, had connections and got their way out of the draft in various ways. But what it built was a more grassroots level and very spread out anti-war movement. But I felt that it got the biggest boost, that movement, when the Vietnam Veterans Against the War evolved and came forward. The GI coffee house movement that a lot of folks were involved in, developing safe spaces just off Army bases around the country where people could, where servicemen and women could speak their minds, listen to speeches and musicians and other kinds of messages that would assist them in their very difficult grappling with what's right and wrong about what we're doing here. And I just felt that, you know, at the front end of every march I took part in, there were Vietnam Veterans Against the War in their fatigues, with their medals, etc. It gave us validity because the folks who disdained the anti-war movement were able to oftentimes just call us a bunch of effete snobs, which, you know, I fit that bill. I know that much. That was a joke. But when you have actual men and women who have put their lives on the line, saying, guess what? I put my life on the line, and it's not what it should be out there. What's going on is not right. So that's my orientation. And then when I first was introduced to you, which was, I don't know, about 8, 9, 10 months ago or something like that, I understood. My first little snippet of introduction to you was, there's Aaron Hughes. He went back to Iraq to apologize. Now, to help me out there and tell me what really happened, and because that was just a little soundbite, as it were, about you. So can you fill in the blanks about that? First of all, what service were you in?
So I'm an Illinoisan. I was born in Waukegan, and I lived in a farm town called Golden, Illinois for a little while, and in the suburbs of Chicago and in Chicago. And I joined the Illinois Army National Guard because I wanted to sandbag the Mississippi River in floods and provide support for my communities. And in 2003, I was a junior at the University of Illinois down in Champaign-Urbana, and I got called up, and I was really actually excited and motivated to go over to Iraq. I thought, we're going to get rid of this terrible dictator. We're going to go build this democracy. I was really caught up in this the story that I had believed about the military and myself. And it wasn't until I got over there and saw it firsthand. And even when I arrived and the first time I crossed the border, I still thought, these kids on the side of the road, those are the kids I'm going to help, even though they're not the kids I'm helping right now. It wasn't until I was there for 15 months that I realized that my mission there had nothing to do with the people of Iraq and solely about sustaining our force there and perpetuating military contracts and corporate contracts and creating a space for a lot of people to make a lot of money. And I saw a lot of people dehumanized and taken advantage of and abused, and I was a part of that process. As a part of looking at Iraqis and not seeing a human being, but seeing a racialized individual that we called Hajis. And it didn't matter if, anything about that individual didn't matter. It didn't matter who they were. They're a Haji. They're an enemy. They're not an Iraqi. And that really disillusioned me. And I came home, but I didn't say anything because I didn't know that I was supposed to be involved. I thought if this country didn't agree with this war, which clearly it didn't, that people would rise up and end the war. I thought if politicians didn't agree with the war, that they would stop funding it. I didn't think it was my responsibility. I also didn't know if I had the right to, because I was someone that just was over there perpetuating it. I was someone over there in the streets perpetuating the violence there. And I didn't know if I was supposed to be the one that, who am I to say something about the war? And it wasn't until I met a Vietnam veteran against the war named Joe Miller down in Champaign-Urbana, and he asked me to come speak. And then that was the first time I ever spoke publicly about my experience in the war, was at a Vietnam Veterans Against the War Veterans Day event. And furthermore, he invited me to come out to a film showing, which was Sir No Sir. So when you talk about the anti-war movement of the 60s against Vietnam, it is true that we tell the story of the students and the student movement and hippies and what they were doing and that they were part of it. But I all of a sudden saw my responsibility within this after watching that film, and it was a huge burden that was just placed on my shoulders. And luckily, when I felt that burden, there was a community of Vietnam Veterans Against the War to help hold me up. And I think that that's something that I think is extremely important, that there's a lot of really angry GIs and veterans that are getting home today. Wow. There's over 2 million of us out there, and the question is who's reaching out to them? Who's organizing them? And who's empowering them to have a voice? And I think that individuals that want to support the peace movement, well, yes, it is true that we can tell people why the war is wrong, and we can tell people the moral arguments involved, and we can tell people the truth. But the power structures, the institutions that are perpetuating this war don't care about that. They don't care about the truth. What they care about is the labor force and the ability to perpetuate the war. And every time we organize a soldier or a GI to say, I don't believe in this, to withdraw their consent from the war, we're making it harder for those institutions to perpetuate it. And I think that's one thing. There's been an alienation, I think, even amongst IVAW, Iraq Veterans Against the War, to some of the peace movement. And I think a lot of that has to do with some class issues. I think some of it has to do with just, what is the mission of the peace movement? Is it to mobilize and empower a broad number of people to help us end this war, or is it to be right? And
to be right? Did you
right,
say?
right.
Uh-huh.
Have a right political line or a political analysis, and I'm not interested in being right. And I think that's that's what brought me to that trip to go back. I heard U.S. Labor Against the War was doing a trip to go support the first International Labor Conference in Erbil, Iraq.
U.S. Labor Against the War? And when was that trip organized?
That was It was originally they wanted to hold a conference in 2008, right around the presidential elections. But they weren't able to pull it together quickly enough, and also there was a lot of violence at that time in Iraq, and so they pushed the conference back to 2009. It was organized.
It was the surge, after all.
Yes, which I think a lot of people credit for lowering violence, but in reality, specifically from testimony from people that served during that period. They showed how it escalated the violence and the destruction of communities. And it's for that extension of oppression that led to the recession of some of the violence that we saw. And that level of sustained oppression can't continue. There's no way an occupying force can sustain that. And anyone that's going to argue that we can do that, I think is head off into an argument of whether people, like, especially with a country that's not fully behind the wars at all, and politically there's no one that's arguing, that's saying, what are we trying to achieve here specifically? Give me a specific achievement that we're trying to accomplish. And it's always rhetorical. We're building democracy. Well, these are abstract concepts. And military operates off of very specific, like, goals and tactics.